Islam don't.
Islam is a principle. Islam is a comprehensive system. Islam is a law. Muslims, say La ilaha illallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You are watching Islam Dunk, and I am here with none other than Dr. Bilal Philips. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Bilal, Sheikh Bilal.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So we're here in Toronto right now, covering the Journey Conference, and so we had numerous speakers that we've been speaking to, and so Dr. Bilal, Sheikh, your specialty was is on Aqidah, scholastically, correct? Like when you went to school for your Islamic studies, your main focus was on Aqidah.
Yeah, on the master levels, when I did my MA, and you could say that the PhD also dealt with issues of Aqidah, but specifically my MA was specializing in Aqidah, along with other subjects which you're also required in the masters, from Hadith, Tafsir, etc.
Now, in Islam, we're taught that there's one Islam, there's one Quran, and then there's the authentic prophetic Sunnah that for us to use as proofs and evidences for theological matters, for juristic legal matters. Yet, a lot of times, when I'm out in the community and I'm talking to different people about Islam, people get the idea that there's different types of Islam because they see different offshoot groups, and there are some in existence that exist throughout the world. First of all, very very quickly, and I know it's a long story, but how did this exactly originate, the offshoots of Islam?
Well, it's like everything else, the initial offshoots, which came from Islam, which was brought by Prophet Adam. He had the one religion, the one way. But in time, people diverted, they deviated. Satanic ideas were introduced. And some people were using it as a means of controlling others. Some people, were agents of Satan to divert them from the path, the correct path. As the Prophet ﷺ had said, on one occasion he drew a line in the dust and drew lines off on either side. And he said, that line on the middle, that's the straight path. That's the one way. And then on the end, all these other lines going off like the veins on the leaf. You got a main vein and you got the other ones on the side. He said, well, these all have a devil at the end of them calling people to them. Those are the many paths. The devil is busy. He's calling people all the time, and he's very inventive. Comes up with all kinds of new ways.
He knows us pretty well, eh?
Yeah.
And knows what can entice us to go a certain way. Now,
Yeah, I mean, that's what he did with Adam, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
He knew what to play on, I mean, Adam was fine. He was in the garden. He knew he was supposed to eat from this tree, and he was fine. But then Satan came and put in his mind, he called the tree what? The tree of life. Shajaratul Khuld. Now, Allah didn't call it that. Satan put that out there, tree of life, tree of eternal life. Hey, life is, I want to have that eternal life. This was not an issue before that. So it became an issue, and that became a means of getting him to disobey Allah.
So it started with something very minutely appealing,
Yeah.
and then grew. Now we see different groups, and all these groups, they're different. I guess you could call them sects or offshoots or different theological groups that exist. Every one of these groups that call themselves Muslim say that they're Muslim, that they're on the Sunnah, or that they're on that they're following the Sirat al-Mustaqim, like the straight path. and we get different ideas from all of them. Now how do we know? How do we know exactly which one's the right path?
Well, actually,
With all this out there.
with the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they asked him the same thing. When he said that you will divide up into 73 sects, as the Christians before you divided into 72, and the Jews before that into 71. And of that 71 sects, only one was going to paradise, the other 70 going to hell. The Christians, only one of the 72 going to paradise, the other 71 are going to hell. And of the Muslims, 73, only one is going to paradise, and the other 72 going to hell. So they asked, well, how do we know which one is it? He said, it's the one that you and I are on. It's that one way, the way which we all know as the Quran and Sunnah, but it was the one followed by the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when a person says, I follow Quran and Sunnah, according to how I understand it, then we know he's gone on one of those paths. Or according to my sheikh said, he's gone one of the paths. Or what this Maulana or this one or that one, if they're not saying, well, that's how the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ understood it, that's what they're following. The madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If they're not talking about that, then they're on one of the misguided paths.
So would you say it's best to use the earliest examples as the criterion to make sure that if a certain Islamic group is claiming certain things, is it best then to use the earliest examples, the Sahabis and the doings and sayings of Rasulullah ﷺ as that criterion to compare them against?
Absolutely. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said, "Khairun nasi qarni." The best of people are my generation. ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Then those who followed them. ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Then those who followed them. So he gave the first three generations as the ones to look up to understand Islam. And it makes sense. When the Quran was revealed, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught it to who? To the companions. He demonstrated it to who? He demonstrated to the companions. All we know of Islam was conveyed to us by the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So then who should we best to turn to best understand it? They lived the revelation. They lived in that era where it came down. They saw the Prophet ﷺ applying it in his life. They attempted to follow him and to apply it. And he approved some of what they were doing, and he disapproved of some of what they did. He corrected them. He guided them. So who do you turn back to but them? That only makes sense.
This is the best examples to go by. Now, I'm currently residing in Windsor right now, and as I've done more research about the Windsor-Detroit area, I've seen that and as far as Islam goes, I noticed in reading through different books and then watching movies like Malcolm X, because as we know Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, became Muslim, but he was part of a group called Nation of Islam who also called themselves Muslim, and it was a big socio-political movement and religious movement that was occurring during that time, and still is. They still have a following now, and there's also like another group called 5%, and these are groups that call themselves Muslim, and use their proofs for what they believe. How can we compare that to the criterion of the Quran and Sunnah, and how do we know that how do we know whether whether what their theology is saying is correct?
Well, as you said, the criterion is the Quran and the Sunnah, and the 5%ers they don't have Quran and Sunnah. Elijans, they don't have Quran and Sunnah. You know, they don't have it. So that's clear that that's not what they're about. I mean, they have the writings, the ramblings, you know, the babble of individuals who were ignorant of Islam, or they had knowledge of Islam which they hid from their followers, and utilized certain elements of it to promote themselves. You know, that's the bottom line. So, I mean, the reality, and myself personally, when I was looking for a lifestyle, a way of life, I mean, I went and visited the temple in Buffalo at the time. I was up here in Toronto. I visited the temple there in Buffalo, and I was impressed. You know, the way the women all were wearing hijab and white, and the men dressed neatly and just that, you know, separated. And nice organization, impressive externally. But then when I listened to what they were saying, the theology, it was nonsense. Absolute nonsense. So, you know, it had nothing to do with Islam. I mean, I didn't even know at the time. I was just investigating different possibilities. I had left Christianity and had become a communist, you know. And you could say also, to some degree, a nationalist. You know, it's a mixture of the two. You know, concern over, you know, oppression of black people in North America, all these other kinds of things. But looking for a set of principles and system that would guide my life. I was starting to realize at the time that communism wasn't the answer. So I was looking to see what else is there. And it was quite evident to me. Nobody had to explain to me that, you know, the so-called Nation of Islam, I refer to them as the Nation of Islam, you know, as, you know, this had nothing to do with Islam at all. You know, this was nonsense. Couldn't possibly have been from God.
Now, on a more, like, just in studying Aqidah in general, because it's very important for everyone, you know, every Muslim, but every human being, really, to, you know, to be able to answer those fundamental questions about who God, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So, you know, and especially, you know, I'm a revert myself, and I know a lot of other reverts to Islam. It's important, especially for them to know right away, you know, who is Allah, what are His attributes, you know, what does Allah do, what does Allah not do, you know, what are these aspects of you know, who Allah is. So what I wanted to ask you is, you know, what would you recommend to someone who wants to learn these things? What would be the best way for them to learn the fundamentals of Aqidah, and then, you know, continue their studies onward?
Well, of course, you've given me an opportunity to plug my major work, The Fundamentals of Tawheed. I would say that's the best starting point, you know, or a good starting point. I've gone through, gathered from my studies, the key elements and bits and pieces of knowledge that one should have to understand who is Allah, you know, and how should we worship Him, you know, clarify what constitutes worship. So that book, The Fundamentals of Tawheed, which I wrote 28 years ago, it wasn't published until 18 years ago or 19 years ago. It, I think, remains one of the most relevant and contemporary works on Aqidah, on who God is. So I'd recommend that. And as well, there are other books which have been written. They're on the market, more and more have come out. Translated, actually, most of their translations, rather than actual writings on the subject. But nonetheless, you know, some of them are quite good translations and are beneficial, written by scholars like Sheikh Hussein, and others. It's good to read as much as one can, in that area and get the clarity, and understanding on the basis of how it was understood by those first generations. Because there's also a whole body of information out there, which is modern understandings, later understandings, mostly which became reasoned, intellectual, scholastic interpretations, trying to put the original clarity within the context of Greek, Persian, Indian philosophy. So then you ended up now with a whole nother concept, which was not understood by that first generation. So we say, let's go back to that first generation's understanding.
Now, some people may argue that that a lot of these, I guess you could call them contemporary understandings, could have still been suitable for that time based on the questions that people were asking, and people would argue that even though they would have, if they would have added maybe like a symbolic nature to something that was not really up for interpretation, if there was a clear sentence and they said, well, no, it means more than that, it means this, that, the same way that the philosophers would do. Some people argue that, it's still acceptable within, within, as far as, doing your duty to glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in regards to his name and attributes. Like what would you say to someone who would argue that these contemporary interpretations can still fit in within the fold of Islam?
Well, I mean, it's within the fold of what Muslims have done. In terms of being within the fold of Islam, what is in the fold of Islam is what was in the fold of Islam when Allah said, Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. Today, I have completed for you your religion. That defined then the fold of Islam. But as to what Muslims can end up in, well, there's no limit, and we can accept, Muslims made mistakes. They thought things were this or they thought things were that. They tried to explain things this way and that way. And of course, as human beings, we make mistakes. We don't say that that person becomes a non-Muslim simply because he had a mistaken understanding about some elements of the deen. Whether it is from the legal Sharia perspectives or it's from issues of Aqidah, where we're still human beings, So, I mean, I'm not one, to say, hey, we just have to throw everybody off, out and clear, only those that have got that clear, perfect understanding with no errors anywhere. This is the people who are the saved sect. Everybody else, you're all going to hell. No, I mean, that's not reasonable. If the Sahaba disputed, disagreed, had incorrect understandings, correct understanding, they're human beings. I mean, but when we look at the body of information, the correctness becomes clear. But as individuals, they make mistakes too.
So could some of these contemporary understandings and contemporary theories on whether it be theology or whether it be whether it be a fiqh issue and that sort of a thing, I know a lot of these things you really did circle around the theological issues, the Aqidah issues. Can some of these contemporary understandings still be acceptable? Like, do we have to work on them on like a case-by-case basis and compare them to the early understandings, or are some of these still acceptable, or is it a situation where them as a whole, we should or shouldn't accept them?
Well, I think that there are certain limits where a person taking these positions may end up outside of Islam. There are limits. Everything has its limits. I would say that we should leave the definition of those limits to those in a position to define them. That if you and I take it upon ourselves to be now the Inquisition to determine who is a believer and who is not, not using the yardstick or the means of those in really knowledgeable situations who have defined certain things for us in the past, then it becomes dangerous. Everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else. You're off the path. You're gone. You're lost. You're an innovator. You're misguided. I mean, like on the what do you call it? The YouTube. There's a section from a lecture which I gave about Harun Yahya. Clarifying that he has a da'wah which is dangerous. The da'wah to Wahdatul Wujud. Nothing exists but Allah. Everything else is an illusion. Right? I was just clarifying that. Somebody took that portion, put it back on the YouTube as a separate portion, put over the heading as a heading, Harun Yahya, is a pagan. Something.
Really?
Yeah, something like that. So then people were emailing me saying, how can you say, brother, that Harun Yahya is a pagan disbeliever? I said, hey, I never said those things. Somebody took a section from a lecture which I gave, and they put these titles and stuff on it. I never said that. And I wouldn't say that. Even if what he's saying, I would say yes. This is the rationale of the pagans. Yes, if you look at, how does a Hindu rationalize worshipping this object which somebody else created? He rationalized it by saying, I'm not actually worshipping the object. That's like an illusion. Right? What I'm actually worshipping is God who becomes concentrated in the object at the time of my worship. So he's not worshiping one God, concentrated in the object, but not the object. This is, three gods in one and one and three, but it becomes a rationale for idolatry. But it doesn't mean that everyone who has taken that rationale becomes an idol worshiper. So I'm not saying that Harun Yahya is an idol worshiper.
Leaving the door open, basically.
No, I'm just saying that philosophy is wrong, it's misguided, it is in error. It is the same rationale which is used by pagans, but I'm not saying you're a pagan. We might say things that may be associated with kufr, disbelief. It may come out of our mouths, but it doesn't mean, that simply because you said it, you are a disbeliever. No, that's an error, mistake. So that's not me. I never labeled Harun Yahya in that way. But the fact of the matter is, that element of his da'wah is misguided, and it's misguiding people, and people should be aware.
Now, there's one question that, and I hear a lot of people asking this, and it has something to do with the nature of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and people always ask this question: why do bad things happen to good people? How come if your God is so loving, how come Hurricane Katrina happened and all those people were affected negatively by it? How come we have people starving? How do we understand that?
Atheists. These are atheists.
Most often, yes.
Yeah, it got to be, because this is the atheist argument for the non-existence of God. They say if your God is good, he's a good God, then where did evil come from in the world? If you say God created the evil, you got an evil God. If you said God didn't create the evil, then where? You're going to have another God. Like the Zoroastrians, for example, they have a God of good and a God of evil.
Right.
That's how they got out of that. They say, well, it's not the good God. God is good, right? So we have to have an evil God who's doing the evil. And the good God's going to beat up the evil God in the end, right? That's how it is, right? So, no, of course, I believe it's all from God. God is in control of everything. That what you perceive as evil may be evil relative to yourself, but for God to permit it, there is a good end for which He has permitted it. Sometimes these good ends are evident, clear, and easy to grasp and understand, and sometimes they're not. And that's what we find in the story of Musa and Khidr. Examples of different ways. The breaking of the boat, when Musa and Khidr crossed the river, they got out. The boatman was very kind to take him across the river. He walks away, and Khidr smashes a hole in the bottom of the boat. You know, Musa said, "What are you doing, man? You know, you destroyed. This is a bad thing you're doing here." He told him, "Remember, you agreed you weren't going to ask any questions." Then he later explained to him that there was a tyrant coming down the river who was grabbing everybody's boat, and that damaged boat he was going to leave because it's damaged. What do you need one of those for? Get the good boats. So imagine the boat owner, when he came back, he saw the hole in his boat. He said, "Who did that?" You know, and he said, that's a bad thing. But then he sees the boat, the tyrant coming, grabbing everybody's boat. He said, that was a good thing. What was apparently a bad thing at one point, when he looked at it, then he could see the silver lining, right? Every dark cloud has a silver lining. He could see it. But then in the case of the young boy who was killed, right, Al-Khidr popped off 12-year-old kid's head. Musa is aghast. What are you doing? Innocent child, you killed this kid. You know? Al-Khidr explains to him after, this child, as innocent as you see him, or he appeared to you, he was going to grow up to be a tyrant, an evil individual whose righteous parents would be so tested in their faith that they would end up, losing it as a result of his, trial that he was going to put on them. So Allah spared them the evil consequence and took this boy's life. Of course, those parents, they could only see their child dead, decapitated. Who would do such an evil thing? And Allah gave them a daughter after that. Good girl, treated her parents well, and of course that was a good thing. It soothed their heart, but still the hole was there. The son would remain in their mind. The son was murdered until Yawm al-Qiyamah, when the books are given. And they see what would have happened had that boy grown up. And then they can appreciate and say, Alhamdulillah, that child's life was taken. Thank you, Allah, for sparing us. So sometimes it becomes evident shortly after, and all of us have experienced that in our lives.
Maybe not to that magnitude
every
time, but there's always been something where you thought it was bad. This is unfortunate.
Everybody experienced
and then you realize that maybe,
later on, say, oh man, because of that unfortunate thing, this good thing happened. Hey, we all experienced that. Then the other perspective to look at it from is the perspective, again, of the child. Child, you're taking him to the dentist for the first time. So you tell him the dentist is a nice man. He wears this long white coat. He's going to give you candy. So that's good. So you come into the dentist's office and he gives him the candies. Oh, it's that nice man that Dad was talking about. And when he puts him on the chair and he starts working, and the pain starts to hit the kid, hey, he's crying, screaming, After that, this is not a nice man anymore. This man is an evil man, And when you go home, later on, he gets another cavity, you want to take him back in, he's not going to see that man again, right? As you can never convince him that was a good man, right? So that child, he can't see what you can see. That the harm that you're putting on him, that pain that he's suffering, is to prevent a greater pain. He doesn't have that foresight. He can't see beyond the immediate pain that happens to him. So it's like that guy.
As a dentist, I still can't see beyond the immediate pain. I still have a hard time with the dentist.
Right. But wait until you have to have a root canal, man. Ooh. When you get that real pain, you say, now I know.
Preventative medicine, 100%.
Yeah. So, this is really the bottom line, that even though somebody drops on you, what about the tsunami Where was the good in that? Okay. We can't see it. It's not immediately clear to us. Though if you listen to some of the Indonesians, when they spoke about it, they said, hey, we were off. This is God's punishment. We can relate to that. But okay, we are outside of the scene. We can't really understand why it comes this way and that way and the other way. But we know ultimately that there's good in it. We can't see it, but it is, because God is good.
So a lot of people sometimes don't realize that when they ask questions like that, it almost projects somewhat of an arrogance, where are you like, as if they're all knowledgeable, saying that they're.
I should be able to understand why about everything. God did this thing. I should be able to understand why. Hey, you can't understand why your brain functions the way it functions. This is right inside your own head. You don't have the whys for so much of you as a human being. The more we find out about human beings, the more we realize we don't know. So there are more whys arising, right? So hey, if you cannot grasp even your own self, the whys for yourself, why are you demanding to know the whys beyond yourself, which affect the world around you?
Now, just before we close, any advice to the Muslims, knowledge-seeking Muslims out there? Anything, any advice for them as far as them getting educated, or just something that we need to keep in mind as Muslims to, something that we need to keep in mind in our hearts all the time, to make us better Muslims, to make us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to know Allah more, to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than we do right now.
Well, I would say that the general advice of the Prophet ﷺ, that seeking knowledge is obligatory for every Muslim, puts us on a path where we should always be seeking knowledge, and the requirements of that path is that we be patient in the process, and that we be humble. Because if we seek it in an arrogant way, then you really can't gain, you can't benefit. So, my advice would be to make that a way of life for us, seeking knowledge about everything that we need to do, not just restricting it to the elements of our spiritual life, but for everything. If you're going to become a mechanic, or a taxi driver, or a doctor, whatever you're going to become, then it's important for you to know everything about this particular profession. Where is the halal, where is the haram, so that your profession, you can do it in a way which is pleasing to God. And that ultimately is ibadah. That's ultimately the worship. That we do whatever we do, being certain that it is pleasing to God. That is the ultimate definition. Somebody says, what is worship? How do you define worship in 2 words? Pleasing God.
That I always, one of the biggest things I notice about Islam is that the Islamic definition of worship, the Islamic definition of monotheism, is a giant bar raise from everyone else, and that's one of the things that really drew me close, and I'm sure is drawing a lot of people close. Thanks so much for spending the time speaking with us today, and we hope to see you tomorrow. You're doing another lecture tomorrow?
Yes, inshallah.
And inshallah we'll be attending. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Islam is a principle. Islam is a comprehensive system. Islam is a law. Muslims, say la ilaha illallah.